For my younger listeners who get much of their news these days from bait clicks and social media warriors, my guest lived and worked in a different world. Jim Menter worked for the Atlanta Journal and Constitution for 40 years, starting as a sports writer, working his way up through various roles before becoming the top editor. He served as the editor of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution from 1982 to 1988. During his tenure, Menter oversaw significant changes in the newspaper industry, including the merger of the Atlanta Constitution and the Atlanta Journal into one combined publication. The editor of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution held power and influence. As editor, Jim Menter and his counterparts during his era had the ability to direct editorial priorities, decide which stories were covered, and set the tone for how issues were presented to the public. In Georgia, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution was one of the most influential media outlets, and its editorial board's opinions were taken seriously by policymakers, business leaders, and the general public. The editor determined which topics would dominate discussions in political circles and the general public, and even around the water coolers. Mr. Menter also had direct access to influential politicians, business leaders, and civic leaders. This placed him in the unique position of not only reporting on power, but interacting with those who wielded it. This also meant he had to balance objectivity with the personal relationships that developed in his role. In the 1980s, the editor of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution was not just a newsroom leader, but a figure of major civic importance, capable of influencing the city's and state's trajectory through the power of the press. You will hear that the demise of the printed newspaper breaks his heart. Like most of us, he never saw internet shopping coming and all the lost newspaper advertising revenue that came with it. In preparation for this conversation, I read his book, Some Things I Wish We Would Forget. There's no way to get all the stories and people I wanted him to discuss in this conversation. I missed the story of his friendly relationship with Rocky Marciano and only mentioned his delivery of $700,000 in ransom money in cash for his colleague Reg Murphy, who was kidnapped. But he did talk about his friendship and interactions with people like Herman Talmadge, Ernest Vandiver, Maynard Jackson, Hosea Williams, and Georgia Bulldog icons Wally Butts and Lauren Smith. Jim did spend time talking about what he calls his best hire and the greatest newspaper person he ever knew, the late, great Louis Grizzard. Jim modestly ensures we understand that he did not discover Louis Grizzard, but I can tell you rather confidently that if not for Jim Menter, there would be no Louis Grizzard, at least as we knew him. Jim Menter is a genius storyteller, even at 94. If you're close to my age and grew up in Georgia, you know who he is, and you will enjoy hearing from him. But this episode is just as important for those who don't know who he is or what he did. You will be educated about how things used to be, which is demonstrated by the fact that the speech that most influenced him was given by his fellow classmate at his high school graduation. I want to give a special thanks to my longtime friend and fraternity brother, David Birch, who introduced me to Jim Menter and happens to be his cousin.
Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.
This is Bruce Goddard, and you're listening to the View from a Hearse podcast. I've got another special guest on here. I am honored to have him on, as a matter of fact. His name is Jim Menter. He's talking to me from his home. He's 94 years old, and I am absolutely sure if you've lived in Georgia for any length of time, you have heard of Jim Menter of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Mr. Menter, thank you so much for joining me today. I really am honored to have you on here.
It's an honor, and I thank you.
I just read most of your book. I ordered it. It came in Saturday night, I went to the ball game in Athens, and I hadn't been able to put the thing down. We're going to talk about that later, but how many books have you written, Jim?
That one.
This one book, and it was published in 1998. I'm holding it in my hand. Some things I wish we wouldn't forget, in parentheses, and others I wish we could. This man has led a remarkable life.
Well, thank you. And I have had a remarkable life, tipping around the edges of a lot of things. And,
Yeah.
and you say you were in Athens Saturday.
Yes, I was.
I used to, went to a million Georgia games as a student, as a sports writer, and then just going with a band and friends. And I would sure like to see that big, huge crowd like they have now.
It's crazy, isn't it? Yeah, I was there. I got season tickets. That's the first game I've been to this year. I've given them away sometimes. It's just, gosh, it's so easy to watch it on the big screen TV now that you didn't have back in those days.
Right.
When I was there. I was there in 72 to 76. So a lot has changed since then, for sure. So let's begin by talking about what you're doing today. I know you've been retired. You're 94 years old as we talk today. You've been retired for a long time. Talk about what you're doing. What's your life like today? And then we're going to talk about what you did.
Well, my life mostly is looking out the window. And, but I did have a long being out of work, I call it, with my retirement. And, of course, I was raised on a farm, and I spent my retirement working outdoors on the tractor and so forth and everything. And I really miss that. That's a good life.
Yeah. So you retired from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and you moved back and started farming again. You just went back to where you came from, right?
Well, yeah, but I had always been farming because I always knew that I might get fired. I might just need to get another line of work. So I tried to build me up a little cattle business so I could always, if I got upset at work, if they got upset with me, I could always come home and fool with my cows.
So when you were working in Atlanta, were you living part-time at your farm or all the time at your farm? Were you driving in to Atlanta?
I live at the farm where we built in, I guess, 1972.
Okay.
Within a mile of where I grew up. And I was doing pretty well till my wife wanted a swimming pool, and the boys wanted a swimming pool, so we built one in the backyard. And we went to breakfast one morning, and we looked out the window, and there were 72 cows drinking out of my swimming pool. And so that sort of put a damper. I spent a long time digging post holes and putting up a better fence.
Unbelievable. So in reading your book, I heard you talk about your Uncle Walter Birch, and I read about another Birch. So my friend and fraternity brother, David Birch, and connected me with you, and you guys are cousins, and then his brother, Bruce Birch. They were both fraternity brothers of mine. I did a podcast about Bruce Birch, who had a remarkable career as a Nashville songwriter. That was episode number 49. So we're at episode number 136 now, so it's been a while back. But talk about your connection with my friends, the Birch brothers.
Well, the Birch family is one of the most unusual families that I know about. My grandmother was a Birch, and she was a magna cum laude graduate of Western College in a time when women just didn't go to college. And she was really a great lady. And her brother, who was Bruce and David's granddaddy, he had 11 children during the 20s in that era when nobody had any money. It was a time when I remember our house and his house and another house, we had electric lights, telephone, but none of them worked because they had all gone away when everything was going, when there was no money around.
Right.
But the Birch family in Edmond, 10 children, and would you believe that every single one of them but one got a 4-year college education, and the one who didn't was the oldest, was Walt. He was at the University of Georgia rooming with another Fayette County boy that became a congressman. But anyway, he only had 1 year of college because he spent his college years, he landed with General Patton in North Africa.
Oh, my.
He landed with him in Sicily, and then he was in Mark Clark in Italy, and then finished the war in south of France. Walt was the first one out of Fayette County to go in service after Pearl Harbor.
What's amazing to me is people, and I say this often, that people don't realize this little rural community, farming community with one stop, and produce these kind of people. I see it over and over. People come out of these small towns. So you just said that David and Bruce's grandfather had, did you say 10 kids? All of them but
10
one.
kids.
All of them but one had a college degree, and the other one that didn't fought the war.
Well, he missed out to fight the war.
Yeah, yeah. Was that granddaddy named Walter Birch, or was that another Birch?
Walter Lee Birch.
Okay, so I also believe I read that Celestine Sibley, I think, was the person that included a letter that somebody wrote to Walter Birch. So he must have been one heck of a guy. Have I got that correct?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the letter, but I knew the person who was writing about it. I knew UZ, and we knew everybody. But yes, he was the Birches. I got a first cousin, Will. I'm a Menter, and he's a Harp. And we say, well, we're just lucky we a drop of Birch blood because it is a most unusual family.
Yeah. Well,
and we have I have a cousin who is not a Birch, but she's retired from Mercer University. She spends up full time in genealogical research. And actually, the Birches go back to some very high office in London in England back in the days of the kings and so forth.
Oh, wow.
So and she also discovered that they very close cousins to Jimmy Carter.
How about that?
The Birches have not looked this up, but there's some argument they were akin to a distant cousin to George Washington. But anyway, they've been around. But the little church in Inman on Veterans Day, I tried to get them to just dedicate have a day for the Birch family and invite all the boys who were still alive. But they would not do it. They did not want to do it. They were too modest. They didn't want to. They felt like other people had been in the war just as they had. But
I don't know all the Birch family for sure, but I know David and knew Bruce well, and they both did well. Bruce in the songwriting business, David in the business world. They don't come any better. So let's move to talk about your own family. So you've got, I think I've read, you've got 2 sons, and your wife is still living, right?
Well, my wife right now is 6 years younger than I, and she's recovering from a flu shot.
Oh, my goodness.
And my son lives here, puts on a fantastic Inman Farm Memorial Day. It's a big farm show. As a matter of fact, I'll send you a copy of the program that they have. It's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, I actually read about that in the book. The first time they had it, they had 6,000 people come.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
And it has grown. It's covered up 2 fields.
All out in the middle of nowhere, really, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And we used to be in the middle of nowhere, but
That's changed.
Atlanta and we are in Peachtree City. The county has grown. So there are more people here, but that show draws from a little from all over the state and so forth. But it's remarkable. It certainly surprised me.
Yeah.
Our other son, Rob, majored in agricultural business, wound up working for the Southern Company briefly, and now he works for the company in Houston called Suez. He was I guess a public relation person, what they call Suez North America. Well, he goes all over the country,
Right.
and matter of fact, he goes to Paris and so forth. But he has really done well.
Well, I'm sure he has. When I read about you and your stories, my goodness, they were set up to do well. Let's go back and talk about when you retired from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. What was your title?
As editor, we had combined the newsroom, and I was the head of all of the newspaper editorial and operation. You
were the managing editor, I think, right, of the AJC, right?
Well, I was managing editor of the Constitution for a while, and I was managing editor of the afternoon paper.
Right.
And then I became the executive editor of the newspaper, which is in charge of both newsrooms. The last few years, I became they changed the title to editor and I was in charge of both the opinion pages and the news pages. I guess we had about 300 people in the operation.
You also ended up being an officer with was it Cox that owned the paper at that point? When you retired, you were officer with that company as well, right?
That was mainly a title because I had retired from the newsroom because we got some new management and we didn't agree, so we agreed to disagree.
Right.
And so I had the title of Vice President of Cox Enterprises. I really never functioned doing anything in that job other than write a column that was distributed to all the papers.
One thing that you said in the book, and I know is true, is that back in those days when you were doing that, the newspaper, and especially the Atlanta Constitution, who you started with. No, you started with the Journal and then moved to the Constitution, didn't you? But
right.
But that was a powerful newspaper. So just talk about that.
Well, I would say when I was editor in charge of the news operation, or later when I was in charge in both, the governors would call me regularly about what they were going to do and talk about it with me. And I remember when the Georgia Pacific came to Atlanta, it was a big deal. George Busby was the governor, and of course he came over and met with us and before the story came out and to talk about that. But governors of the state of Georgia did not do much of anything that they didn't consult with either the editors of the newspaper or Jack Tarver, who was a powerful publisher of both papers.
And the reason is because what they said, people took to the bank, right? I mean, people were reading, what was it, covers Dixie like the dew, and what was the other motto? I mean, everybody was reading this paper. It was powerful. So what you said was going to be very important to them, right?
Right. The newspapers were very big until television got to be very big.
You had all the talented writers. I read you listed people. My gosh, these people have done everything in the world. It started off in the sports division with you, and they became heads of companies, vice president of Delta Airlines, and all this stuff. But now the talent is not like it used to be, for one thing, but the whole business has changed. Just talk about what you see in the newspaper business. Most of them can't stay afloat, financially.
Of course, the newspapers by the hundreds have gone out of business. The Wall Street Journal, I would say, is the best newspaper that I've ever encountered then and now. And of course, the New York Times, I'm on the conservative side, and the New York Times, for those who lean more to the liberal, it's a great newspaper, but I think that the Wall Street Journal has the most balance of any. I know they're very good. And man, the Journal-Constitution has a good sports section. I know I read the story of the Kentucky game. I could not begin to cover a game like that as good as they do. They know more.
Right.
So they've got some very good points, but the big problem is nobody reads newspapers anymore when you count it up. The people who actually read them are very small, so they do not play as big a role. My wife and I were in Disney World when Richard Nixon was when he was in all of his trouble, and they had microphones on little stands out in the aisle, so that the editors who wanted to could walk up and get on one of those aisle microphones and ask the president a question. And I remember one guy who it was walked up and said, "Mr. President, will the Republic stand?" And my thought was, of course, we'll get it, you damn fool. You're just showing off for them, ask questions. But if he asked that question today, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how long this country, as we know it, will endure.
It's scary. There's no question about it. I mean, that's one of the things that I found so interesting in your book. You make the comment that they used to ride you by in the bus to show you what a Republican looked like. So you didn't know any Republicans growing up, but the Democrats were the conservative party, and that has changed completely. It's flipped for sure. Did you see that coming with the newspaper business? Did you have any idea that could happen? I mean, you're talking about what could happen with the country, and I'm with you. It's scary, but could you see anything in the future that this newspaper whole business could be going spiraling down?
Well, what I did not foresee Amazon, because I thought the newspapers Journal-Constitution now sends us a tablet thing. You could put it on a stand, and it's very good. You can read the newspaper very well, and there's a lot of good stuff in it. Although it's too far, much leans too far left and gets into politics further than it should. But my wife reads it. She likes to read these off the tablet. I don't. That's just because I have that hate for the competition that I hate for whatever it was to put me out of business.
Right, I get it.
But
I get it. Your whole life was made up in that newspaper. To see somebody reading off a tablet is a whole different game, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But I thought the newspapers would do what Amazon is doing for themselves. I didn't know they would lose all the advertising. I mean, people from Savannah used to catch a train to go shop and get riches in Atlanta. But now they could do it over
the internet.
Over the internet.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody in the newspaper thought that they had any idea what Amazon would be.
Right. Or nobody else. Yeah.
No.
So going back to your beginning, you transferred into Georgia. You were becoming a journalist, going to journalism school there, and you got a job with the Red and Black. So you started covering college sports in a hurry while you were in Athens, right?
Absolutely. I transferred from North Georgia College, and of course, I had never met anybody or anything. And so I got onto the Red and Black, and my first assignment was to go down to the stadium for a practice, because it was going to be very special, because Frank Leahy was coming down from Notre Dame to study Coach Butts' passing game. And so my job was to go down and get an interview with Frank Leahy. But Frank Leahy, he was the biggest name in college football. So I go down to the stadium, and they're having a practice in the stadium. And so I'm down there backed up in the hedge trying to sort of I just didn't know what to do, and I was scared to death. But I bet I had met Coach Butts, and he was walking around doing his job coaching.
And you had to be nervous, right?
Yeah. And I said, Coach Butts, would you introduce me to Coach Leahy? He said, yes, he would. And then he went on about his business, and it seemed to me about maybe 10, 15 years. It's probably been about half an hour. Didn't see any more of him. And then just before it started to practice, and I thought I'd missed it all, Coach Butts walks up and says to me, he says, Frank and I are going to watch this one from the stadium steps. Said, we're going to be up there. Would you like to sit with us?
Amazing.
So anyway, I did, and that was my first, that Leahy story was my.
So here you were, this rookie, young, wet behind the ears reporter, and you get to sit up in the booth with Frank Leahy from Notre Dame and Wally Butts from Georgia and sit there and watch the whole scrimmage. That's pretty cool right there. I know you appreciated Coach Butts for that, for sure, right?
I always did. He was always he could be very accommodating.
I grew up in a little town, Reynolds, Georgia, and halfway between Macon and Columbus, and Coach Butts, before my time, I don't remember it. I may have been alive, but I don't remember it. But he would stop on recruiting trips. He'd always stop at the Reynolds Pharmacy to get a Coca-Cola, and several people would see him often, just as nice as he could be.
I'd go over and get a hotel room in Athens and cover what we used to call two-a-days. Two-a-days started on Labor Day. And, of course, it was practice with Coach Butts all day long. Well, he would invite me home for dinner and for lunch. and we would have a formal table. He would have the plate stacked up in front of him, and I'd never seen that before. And Winnie, his wife, didn't eat, but she sort of walked around and kept the table going. But anyway, Coach Butts would fix my plate for him, and he would take it, and he would dip it out and hand it to me. And we had the same thing every day. Guess what we had?
What?
We had cornbread and buttermilk.
Is that right? Who all was he feeding? Just the writers or other people, coaches or what?
Just Coach Butts and me.
Oh,
that
just
was
you two.
Cornbread, buttermilk, peanut brittle for dessert. That was the first time I'd ever seen anybody serving, the men at the head of the table, serving off of fine china. That was probably the last time, and certainly the last time I saw cornbread and buttermilk.
Did you like it? Could you eat it?
Well, it was good, yeah. It was very good.
I also read about your relationship with Lauren Smith. You guys have been friends a long time, right?
Well, started out he worked for Dan McGill, and Lauren didn't have any money, because I don't know why he didn't, because I later got to know his daddy was a pretty prosperous farmer and so forth. But anyway, we got free tickets because the sports writers could get them. And I'd get my free tickets, and I would give them to Lauren. He'd sell them to buy something to eat. So I say I got him started on living off tickets. But he has had the most fabulous career.
Oh, he has.
Of anybody I know.
He is well known in Georgia circles, that is for sure.
He was well known, and we used to travel together. And when I was better off physically, and we went. Some people down in one of those South Georgia towns used to have us down every year for a quail hunt.
Right.
Well, after Lauren was diagnosed with leukemia, we kept going, and we would hunt in the morning and hunt in the afternoon and go to a cabin on the creek down there and have lunch. Pretty big thing. Well, one morning, I guess about 11 o'clock, we were walking along, and I looked back, and Lauren was passed out on the ground, and we got him up in back of a pickup truck, hauled him into the place we were going to eat lunch. It was a cold day, and they had a fire going. We got him revived, and we ate lunch. It became 2 o'clock when we planned to go hunt that afternoon. I said, Lauren, we don't need to hunt. We need to go home. He insisted on hunting that afternoon, so we hunted again. And gosh, he had a little bag of dry ice, and he carried a syringe around with him. Gave himself a shot in the stomach every day. And gosh, at one time we were driving, and he was driving the car we were riding, and Myrna and Ann were in the back, and Lauren passed out at the wheel, and I reached over and sort of got the car under control. But he was, he was not expected to live. But he said there were days he could hardly get out of bed. But he was afraid if he ever did not get out of bed, he never would get out of bed. But nobody knows how sick he was, and what he's done since he got cured of that leukemia is unbelievable. He is, I believe Lauren is 87, I think it's the same age.
Yeah, I actually saw him from a distance Saturday. He was sitting there with whatever they do at the bookstore there with the other announcers. He's still active there, isn't he?
He is doing more things now than he has ever done. he got a second life. But I'm telling you, Lawrence Smith was a dead man.
That's amazing. Amazing story. You know, the other thing, he became famous with Larry Munson and said, "What you got, Lauren?" on the sidelines. Yeah. He was his go-to man down there, wasn't he?
Right, he was.
So I've got to ask you about Louis Grizzard. I actually did a podcast. I think I remember this guy wrote a book, Peter Stoddard, but I think I remember him. He may have interviewed you for that book. I don't know if you remember Peter Stoddard. Do you remember him?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I think I remember him saying that he talked to you. He actually died a few months ago. But I know you consider Louis Grizzard your greatest hire. And just talk a little bit about what you saw in Louis Grizzard.
I get credit for hiring Louis Grizzard. I should not, because the way Louis came to work for the Journal, and I was running the sports department at the time, and we needed somebody to cover high school and whatever. We just needed somebody at the very bottom of the ladder. Not a big hire at all, but just somebody. But anyway, what I do is I go over to Athens, and I knocked on Vince Dooley's door. And I said, Vince, what young sports writer that you've dealt with interviewed you lately were you impressed by? And he said, well, Louis Grizzard. He said he works for the kid who works for the Athens paper. He said he is really good. He is one of the best I've run across. And then I walk on over to the other door and knock on Joe Reeves' door. And I asked him the question, and he said Louis Grizzard. And so there was a baseball game, and Dan McGill told me that Louis was going to cover the baseball game for the Athens paper. So I go over and I sit down with this kid, it's Louis Grizzard, introduce myself. We're watching the game and making notes as we go, and so then. And I said, Louis, how would you like to work for the Journal-Constitution? Because anybody would in those days.
For sure. And
he said, I would like to. And I said, well, I'll hire you, but one question, if you didn't Vietnam War, I said, if you're going to get drafted next week, you don't need to do it because it won't be worthwhile. He said, well, yeah, I won't get drafted, he said, because I have a heart valve that didn't work very well. But the doctors have told me it will never cause me any trouble. So I said, well, you come on to work for the Journal-Constitution. But I said, how much more do you need to get your degree? He said he needed a partial quarter at the University of Georgia. I said, but you got to promise me you'll go out to Oglethorpe and get those courses and work it out to get your degree. So yeah, I'll do that. So anyway, that's the way Louis, I didn't exactly discover Louis, but he comes to Atlanta, and it doesn't take long that I figured out that he's something unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, and so pretty soon I had him in the slot, which handles Actually, that's the person in charge of getting the paper out and everything. And he did that so well that when they sent me off to the Constitution, I didn't want to go. Lewis, I think, was 21, and Bill Fields was my boss, was director. And I talked Mr. Fields into letting Lewis have my old job in the sports department. So we did. A couple of days later, Jack Tarver, who was the publisher and everybody's boss, came by and asked me, says, "Who is that kid you talked him into running the Journal Sports Department? He looks like a high school kid." I said, "Mr. Tarver, he's going on to 30 years old." And Mr. Tarver walked on off. Well, he was going on 30, but it was about 9 years away. But almost overnight, I thought that we did have, when Lewis got there, we had a really good department. It had been that way for years and years and years, going back long before I got there. But it was known as one of the top sports sections in the country.
Sure.
Well, I'm telling you, right quick, I mean almost overnight, Lewis made that Journal Sports at least twice as good as he did under me. I mean, I was just amazed at how well he did.
So you had the same path. I guess that happens a lot. A lot of these people start in sports and then move to other stuff. You did it. You became editor, writing other columns as well. But Lewis did the same. He moved out of sports and became nationally known. So is that kind of a common path?
Yeah, absolutely. It goes back a long way.
Yeah.
But anyway, the journal people talked to us into becoming an assistant city editor. And but he was not in job. I mean, he was not in charge. So he couldn't do what he could do. And
right.
He left. And so pretty soon as I could, I hired him. And I didn't have a title job open, but I just made him sort of at large. And when we had a plane crash, a dam break, big stories, we had a couple. We had a airline crash and a dam break up at the core that wiped out a lot of people.
Right.
I just sort of told everybody the room to get out of his way. And Lewis would take over. He would do their job and my job better than either of us could do it. But anyway, well, he got a little tired of messing with it. So he quit, and then he went to Chicago. I hired him once to come back. We combined the Journal-Constitution. We were going to combine them together. And I was going to put Lewis in charge of that, so I hired him. That's the third time I hired him. And he went back to Chicago and been there very long. And they were getting ready to make him editor of the Chicago Sun-Times. But Lewis took it for a little while, then decided that he did not want to do that. So I hired him to come back to it.
So you hired him 4 times, right?
4 times, yeah.
That's amazing.
The reason I hired him 4 times, Lewis and I talked every night on the phone. I was working night, and so was he. And so anyway, I was looking for a news page columnist. And I asked him, I said, "Lewis, who you know that could make me a good news page columnist?" And he said, "How about me?" I said, "Well, Lewis, you've never written a column. And column writing is different from running a newspaper. But if you want to try it, it's okay with me." Because Lewis never did any writing to speak of. But I was so damn glad to get him back for anything. I thought he'd come back and I could make him an editor. But anyway, the opening I had was a news page columnist. So I told Lewis, I said, you come back and write a column for the sports department for a few weeks, maybe a month or 2, then we'll move you over, but let you get your feet on the ground and somewhere you're interested in. But anyway, he said, "Well, I'm going to send you 2 columns. Look them over. 3. He sent me 3 columns. The first one was, if I get back to Georgia, I'll nail my feet to the ground. And so anyway,
I remember that one.
I took those 3 columns home, and at supper I read them to my wife, and she could tell what I was thinking about. She said, "You're going to get fired," because we had a hard rule at the paper. If you leave once, you're not anxious to have you back. If you leave twice, you're not coming back. If you leave more than twice, you're gone. So I didn't ask anybody to break the rule. I just had Lewis show up and start writing the column.
And the rest is history, right?
And you know the story from that. He had turned down jobs as editor of the Chicago Sun-Times, the Greenville paper in South Carolina, and the Austin paper in the Cox organization. So he could have been, Lewis had the best newspaper mind I've ever known. For example, do you remember when Woody Hayes, the Ohio State coach,
Yep.
hit that guy
Yep.
anyway, he was out of a job, the great Woody Hayes.
Right.
Lewis, that was back in the days when Lewis was on the Journal, and I was still on the Constitution. But anyway, I looked up in the Constitution, and there's a byline story with a Journal reporter who had an interview with Woody Hayes, who would not see anybody from the New York Times or the Washington Post or any of the networks. He would not come. He would not to speak to anybody. And I said, Lewis, how'd you pull that off? He said, I just sent him up there and told him to knock on the door and I had to speak to him, and it worked. So, but I would have never thought that anybody from Atlanta could get in to talk to Woody Hayes when nobody else could, but that was the scoop he got. Other time when I was on the other paper and he was working for the Journal was when the draft dodgers had run off to California, and of course we with the Constitution just sat there and read about it off the AP wire. Well, the Journal comes out. Frank Holland, who was a baseball writer, he'd gone to a bar and interviewed about 20 of them and had a great national scoop. What Lewis did, he immediately, when he saw that what happened, what he said, well, our baseball writer is up there. I'll just take him off baseball for the night and let him go to the bar. And see, I would have never thought of that. Nobody else in the newspaper would have thought of that. Lewis was a genius. He was the best I've ever known. He was the easiest to deal with. As a matter of fact, for the first year when he wrote a column, I edited it every day because the copy desk wanted to mess with it. And, to write in a column, there's a certain rhythm and there's certain things.
He had his own way of writing, didn't he? Yep.
Yeah, there may be some things that they didn't teach you in the Harvard Business English department. But, of course, everybody in the paper, except those who knew him well, were very jealous of Lewis.
Yeah, I'm sure. I tell you, he was so funny. He was so witty. You know, I'm talking to you from Lake Oconee, and he had a cottage within walking distance down here where he and catfish. He wrote about catfish playing in the lake. He was one funny guy. One of the stories that was very touching, though, when you told in your book that when Lewis did a little talk at a wedding, and you said no minister anywhere could have done a better sermon than Lewis did. It was very touching. It really wasn't funny. It was just very touching, right?
Yeah, I got that letter after he died, and he just sat it down in his typewriter and knocked it out. You know, he obviously didn't have to rewrite and all that stuff. He
just did it the night before. That's what you said. He's got his typewriter. It wasn't long, but it was very, very touching. He had it all. He could pull your heartstrings. The article he wrote about the catfish when he died, I actually copied that and put it on Facebook. And that thing went viral. And I know people had already read it, but anybody that loves the animal, that story was so touching. We could go on and on about Lewis, but I know you were a big part of his career, and I know that you had a great relationship with him and so many others. One of the people that you had a great relationship was Herman Talmadge, and I know you guys were friends in the political world, and then also Ernest Vanderveer.
Well, of course, the newspaper was always pretty much against Herman.
Right.
But where we live in South Fayette County, Herman lived right across the river in Lovejoy, and was with his second wife. After I had left the Journal-Constitution, I got involved with the Henry County newspaper and the Clayton County newspaper. I hired Herman to write a column for us because I knew him pretty well. But I got to know him real well, and he would invite me over to breakfast. His wife would still be asleep, and Herman would cook breakfast for us at 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning. So one morning I walk in, and Herman is sitting there reading Carl Sanders' book. It had just come out, and he had on a pair of coveralls and a spittoon beside him, and an unlit cigar in his mouth, and a little fire burning in him. So I said, well, Sanders, what do you think of Governor Sanders' book? He said, well, I'll tell you. In his book, Carl comes out well ahead of Thomas Jefferson. Then he would get in his old pickup, and we ate breakfast. We'd go out and feed his dogs. He had bird dogs and a little wire fence. He lived in a very small house, Herman was, and then he would go out and teach me how to cruise timber. So anyway, taught me how to count the trees and walk off and figure the height, figure how much timber you had to sell.
Your comment about him, that he said if he believed what he read in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about him, he wouldn't vote for himself, right?
I'd vote for myself.
So talk about Ernest Vanderbilt.
We spent many afternoons sitting on his porch. We got to just know each other really well. He told me a lot of things. And he had to be, I think, the most honest governor we've ever had. He just had a lot of interesting things to talk about. Like,
And he also accomplished a lot, right?
Yeah, a whole heck of a lot with it. That commission that studied the government and working on the mental hospital. But absolutely, I don't think anybody accomplished quite as much because he paved roads and got schools and he changed the face of rural Georgia. And I would say that he was probably maybe the best governor we've ever had.
Well, we could talk about so much. I know, and folks, you can go read it. We're not going to have time to talk about it, but I was in college. I was at University of Georgia, I think my sophomore, junior year when Reg Murphy at the Atlanta paper got kidnapped, and the man that you're listening to today had to take $700,000 in cash in suitcases and put them on what is now Georgia 400 by a pole. I know that had to be an interesting day. I know we don't have time to tell the whole story, but I'm sure you didn't realize it, but the FBI had you surrounded out there that day. I read, right?
We had enough long-range rifles to killed I don't know how many people.
You can Google that story because it is interesting. I got to ask you one question. Where in the heck did you get $700,000 in cash? Well, where did they come up with that?
Well, the Federal Reserve was next door to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.
Okay.
On Mayor Street. So all we did was Mr. Tarver, who was a publisher, and I guess he got somebody to carry him, just walked across the street and got 2 suitcases filled up with $20 bills, which a suitcase full of $20 bills was a lot heavier than I thought.
I remember you saying you got there and you had them wedged in your car. You couldn't get them out, right?
It got stuck, yeah.
It's hilarious. You know, I don't think the FBI does deals like that anymore. I don't think they get $700,000 in cash or whatever it is, and I think they go about it a different way these days, right?
Right.
You're one of those people I could talk to. I need to do this again. You got so much rich stuff. I mean, all the people from Bear Bryant, all these stories of these coaches and the people you've met, the people you've hired that did so well in life. Folks, the name of his book is Some Things I Wish We Wouldn't Forget and Others I Wish We Could by Jim Menter. I ordered mine from Amazon. It's a hardback book. It's been out a long time, 27 years or whatever it is, or 26 years, but I can tell you I can't put it down. If you like backroom stories about people that you've heard of all your life and about rural Georgia, we didn't even talk about that, the power of coming from these little towns and what this man accomplished and the people he met is an incredible story. So I highly recommend you getting that. So let me ask you this. You're 94 now. When you look back...
Well, let me correct that. If I make it to the 22nd of this month, I'll be 94.
Okay, so you're almost 94. You 22nd is 1 week and a day. When you look back, is there anything you would change about your life, if you could?
A lot of things. One thing, I would be a little easier on Maynard Jackson, who when he became mayor, first black in Atlanta. The city would have probably been better off if we'd given him a little more quiet support and been a little nicer to him. If the city had accepted what the city was going to become, with things, it would probably have been a lot easier on everybody. You ought to be very careful how you use the power of the newspaper you've got.
Well, you were in a powerful seat with a powerful newspaper. There's no question about it.
I had a fun with Jose Williams, who was my enemy. Who wound up being my source. He was a fun guy, and anyway, he kept getting arrested for drunk driving.
Yep.
And so anyway, on a Monday morning, he'd been arrested, and I called him. I said, Jose, I said, you need to watch your drinking and driving. I said, you've done some good things. You've got a good name, so forth. You just not to take care of that. You need to watch your drunk driving. He said, Jim, let me tell you something. Said, you get your white Cadillac, you grow your beard, a white beard, and you put on some dark glasses, and you get in that Cadillac, you get on I-75, and head yourself down to Macon, see how far you get. But he he was a funny guy. So
How about that?
there are good people on both sides.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So let me ask you this: I want to ask you, professionally and personally, what are you most proud of in your life? In a week and a day, you'll be 94 years old. What makes you most proud, professionally first?
Well, I would say that getting to the top of the Journal Constitution at that time, what I'm most proud of.
Well, you should be. You should be. What an amazing story. And what makes you proud is where you came from, in a little farming community that you were picking cotton and working on your daddy's farm, and to do all of a sudden literally having one of the most powerful jobs you can have in this state and in this part of the country, actually. You came from a long way. So what makes you most proud personally, Jim?
Well, it's one little thing I always think of. The valedictorian of our little class of, I think it was 45 people in 1947. Valedictorian was Robert Arnold, who was smarter than the rest of us and became a well-known doctor in Perry, Georgia. But Robert gave this speech at graduation, and he said this fellow is out in his car, he's driving somewhere, and he realized he's lost. He doesn't have any idea where he is. And he finally came to an intersection, and he said, well, I think I can figure it out here because they'll have a signpost. So when they got there,
since I was having technical difficulty as Jim was telling this story, I'm going to read it right out of his book to make sure you get the gist of this story. Robert Arnold, later a distinguished physician, made our valedictory address. He told about a man who was on a journey without a road map and got lost. When he came to an intersection where a signpost should have told him where he was, the signpost had been knocked down. So what did Robert's traveler do? He simply picked up the signpost, positioned it so the appropriate arrow faced in the direction he had come from, and all the other destinations fell into place. The moral is that if you know where you came from, you will always know where you're going.
So he stood the sign up and he pointed back to where he came from. Moral being, if you know where you came from, you never get lost.
Well, I actually read that in your book, and it's very touching. It's very true. And if there's anybody that listening to your story and reading you, that you never forgot where you came from, you never fully took your feet out of that little Fayette County town, Inman,
right?
And you never forgot where you came from. What a great lesson for all of us. We all come from somewhere, and a lot of people tend to forget where they came from, and when you do that, you're going to lose your way. That is very true. So one more question, and you may have said it, but I'll give you one more opportunity. When it's all said and done, what do you want people to remember about Jim Menter?
I would say it would be he had a lot of good luck.
He had a lot of good luck.
Yeah.
Well, I think you may have had some good luck, but you also made some luck, and you made some great decisions, and you did well. You didn't get there by luck, I can tell you that. But I know you're a very modest man, but you accomplished a lot for sure.
But I thank you. But I have one more story. I really need to tell you. In Lewis's last illness, I was going by to see him every afternoon, and he had his typewriter. He never learned to never use a computer. Only his Crescenta lamp, what it was, table, right beside his bed. And he said, "Well, you know, said when you started writing this column for the paper, you told me I could write a column for maybe 10 years, and then I would burn out, and I'd have to go back to being an editor." He said, "I just want to tell you, it's been 10 years, and I'm going to start that column, write that column for tomorrow." And I just want to remind you, it's been 10 years, and I'm still going. I said, "Lewis, that is remarkable. How do you do it?" He said, "I've got a secret. I can remember things that never happened."
Thank you so much, sir. You honored me. This has been fun. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And happy birthday. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you very much. Hope I make it.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.